Hi everyone, I'm Silval, and this is a little request for Isabel Pruce, who wanted to see I'm doing top 10, but 10 favourite 80s movies. I've got one shout out, and it goes to Atticus Naramore. So, my 10 of my favourite 80s movies. I love 80s movies. Some of the best movies, in my opinion, came from the 80s, so it's quite hard for me to choose just 10 of them. But here are 10 of my most favourites. So we'll start off with Flight of the Navigator. Now, Flight of the Navigator, believe it or not, it's a Disney movie you probably won't have heard of, but it's really, really good. It's one that my dad and I have always watched together, so it's special to me. And it's basically about a kid who gets kidnapped by an alien, and the alien's doing some research. But what the alien does is he does his research and then he returns the specimen, in this case a human from planet Earth, back to the place and time where he took the specimen from. That's what he does with all the aliens from all the other planets. However, something went wrong, and his spaceship hit an electrical wire, like a telegraph pole, and the poor kid that he took, he could not return him to his original time, so he returned him 10 years in the future. So you can imagine all the kid's parents and his brother and I think he just had a brother. I don't think he had a sister, but his brother and everyone is 10 years older, and he's the little kid. His name's David. He's still just a child. So imagine like being suddenly waking up and having no memory of going anywhere, and everyone is 10 years older, and you're 10 years in the future. It's quite scary. Anyway, NASA get wind of David's brain signals because he's got all this information in his brain that this alien's put into him because of the accident. And so instead of being in the alien's database, it's in David's brain. So the alien has to get David back to get the information from his brain and return him. But he is still sure that he cannot return him to the time that he took him from. He still thinks it has to be, the 10 years in the future. So, anyway, it's kind of a buddy comedy. David makes friends with the alien, whose name is Max. And Max has this amazing spaceship. It's all like reflective, and it can change shape. And Max is done by Jim Henson, as are all the little aliens that you see here in the poster. They're all done by Jim Henson. It's a great movie, and I think it's very underrated. Not many people have heard of it, and I love it. So moving on. This is probably, one of my favourite movies of all time, Short Circuit. It's about, essentially, a robot that gets zapped by lightning and becomes alive. He's an army robot, and so he's supposed to go around shooting people and things like that. He's one of 5. He is actually the 5th robot of 5 of these army robots. But because he's now got life, he understands that, through a series of events, he accidentally squishes a grasshopper, and his friend says, it's dead, it's not coming back. So the robot number 5, his name is, although he does get a proper name at the end of the film, Johnny 5. He realizes that life is special and he doesn't want to die. But of course, the army wants him back, so they send the other robots to track him down. And so the movie goes on from there. But it's really good, and they actually did do a sequel. I don't think the sequel's as good because Ali Sheedy, who played Stephanie, his friend in the film, she's not in the second one. But the Indian guy is, and so it's about Johnny 5, the robot, and his friend, the Indian chap, whose name escapes me right now. And yeah, the second one's quite good as well, but it does have a scene in it that made me cry when I was a kid. So, moving on. Gremlins, of course, everyone knows this film, and if you don't, you must have been living under a rock your whole life. Don't feed them before midnight, don't get them wet. Gremlins. They made a sequel to this film, as a lot of you have probably seen. I don't really need to say much about this one, but I love it, and I also love the sequel as well. And they were going to do, I don't know if it was a third one or a remake, but I'm glad they haven't, because I think that the 2 Gremlins movies are fantastic, and I don't think they should really touch them and try to improve on something that's already really good. Another unknown one, this is Upworld, also known as Gnome the Gnome. Now, it's a buddy cop comedy, and again, like I said, you probably haven't heard of it. Not many people have heard of it. It's very hard to get hold of on DVD or video. I have a copy that I had to download off the internet, which is, I think, taken from a video. I don't even know there's DVD release. But basically, there's a crime happens, and the only witness to it is the little guy on the left. He's called Gnome, the gnome. Now, a gnome, but he pronounces the G, so his name's Norm, but he calls himself Gnome, and he's a gnome. So basically, the cop has this lumen thing that Gnome wants back, and he won't give it back to him until Gnome helps him. But the bad guys get the lumen, and then obviously Gnome wants to get the bad guys as well, just like the cop, and they get along quite well. But to begin with, Gnome is he's quite a stubborn little chap. He doesn't want to help or anything like that. But there's some really funny scenes in it, like when he's dressed up to sort of mingle with humans, and he's wearing a cap and a t-shirt and sunglasses, and that's quite funny. Another good film, and very underrated. I like the less popular things. I mean, everyone has obviously heard of things like Gremlins, Back to the Future, and all those, but I like these ones that not many people have heard of. Here's another good one, Harry and the Hendersons. In short, it's about a family who accidentally hit Bigfoot, and so they look after him, and they have to obviously return him to the wild at the end. But they did do a whole TV series based on this film. It's a very, very funny film because obviously Harry the Bigfoot is very tall and he's very clumsy, so you can imagine he wrecks most of their things. Land Before Time, you've probably all heard of this one. I think they did about 14 movies after it and a TV series that bombed. I did enjoy all the other films they did as well as this one. This will always be the best, obviously. It was done by Don Bluth, unlike the sequels. I'm not sure. I think a lot of the same voice actors came out for the sequels as well. Something very awful and tragic happened to Ducky's voice actor. That's the little dinosaur riding on the back of Spike to the left of the picture. And unfortunately, I do think of that when I see this. It was quite tragic. Look it up on Google. I'm not telling you because it's not very nice. But yeah, Land Before Time, another classic. I'm just sad that a lot of people remember it for the terrible sequels as opposed to the brilliant original film. Beetlejuice. I love Beetlejuice. Now, Beetlejuice wasn't really, and if I say it again, he'll probably appear, because if you say it 3 times, he appears. In the film, that is. It wasn't really a kid's film. It was a Tim Burton film, and I wouldn't consider it to be a kid's film. But they did do a cartoon series based on it. Because didn't they do cartoon series for everything back then? I mean, they did cartoon series for Bill and Ted, Ace Ventura, The Mask, a lot of the Disney ones as well. And the cartoon series was quite good. But last time I watched it, and maybe I was a bit too old for it then, I found that it was kind of repetitive. The music in that was very repetitive, and the jokes weren't too good. But I still love the film, and they were going to do a sequel to it. And Michael Keaton, who played the main character, he wanted to do it as well. He wanted to do a sequel, but unfortunately no one else particularly wanted one. So maybe it's better there wasn't a sequel and people just remember it for the classic movie that it is. Pet Sematary. This is based on a book by Stephen King. It's my favourite of his books. They actually did a remake of this film recently, and I thought it was absolutely abysmal. I watched it in the cinema and felt I'd wasted my money. Clearly they were having a joke with it. Pet Sematary it's a horror movie, so I won't go too in depth with it for the younger viewers here. It is basically about, it's a cemetery that's built on an ancient Indian burial ground, and so if you bury something there, it will come back to life. And if it's recently dead, then they think that it will be more like it was in real life, but it turns out that obviously it's a bad idea to raise the dead. It really is not good. In every single movie, it is never a good idea to raise the dead. So you can imagine whoever's buried comes back and they're not the same. They're kind of evil. So another good one, good soundtrack too. The Dark Crystal, you probably may have heard of this. If you didn't know of it before, the recent series on Netflix will have probably introduced you to the original film. This was Jim Henson, and it was incredible. I mean, the movie terrified me as a kid. There are scenes in it that made me just want to hide behind the sofa, but it was brilliant, and it's always stayed with me. The characters were memorable, the effects, the puppets were absolutely incredible, the imagination behind it was amazing. And for those of you who don't know, the series on Netflix has actually now been cancelled. And I think that's terrible because they put so much work into it that it really shouldn't have been cancelled after only one series. And yeah, I'm not sure why it was cancelled, but a few of my friends on Facebook were quite upset by it, and I can understand why. But if they had a good reason for not doing another series, then, well, you know, they have their reasons. And finally, we have Batteries Not Included. Now, this film, I don't, again, really consider it, I don't consider this one for kids. Not that all of these films are for kids, but most of them are for kids, you know. In fact, a lot of the popular 80s movies are family or for kids. Batteries Not Included was aimed at children, but there are some quite adult themes in it. When I was a kid, I think I found the film kind of threatening in some ways because of the characters and what they did and things like that. But it had cute robots in it, so it was all good. It was a Steven Spielberg film, as you can see from the poster here, and it was about a family of robots that crash land in an apartment building. The apartment building's condemned, it's going to be pulled down, and the people are worried because they're going to lose their homes. But I really recommend checking it out. Again, it's not amazingly well known, but if you're a fan of robot movies or good 80s movies, I really recommend it. So that's all for this little foray into 10 of my favourite movies from the 80s. I have most of these on DVD and I've seen them quite a few times as well. I think any of these movies I can watch anytime, and I think a good movie is always one that you can watch anytime and never get bored of. Anyway, that's all for this. I hope I haven't rambled too much. It's sometimes difficult to find things to say when I'm just ad-libbing and describing things as I go along. I don't really have a script or anything I read from. I just do it and it flows and people seem to like it, so I suppose it's more natural. Anyway, like I said, that's all for this video. If you want to see similar videos, there aren't any movie ones, but I'll put a few in the boxes down below and, you know, see what I can find when I post this. As always, feel free to check out my Silverby merchandise or buy me a coffee on Ko-fi. All of it helps because I'm working from home now as a full-time artist. And that's all for this time. This is Silverwolf signing off.